In this video, we will take a look at two commonly misunderstood and confused terms: human trafficking and migrant smuggling. Now let's start by taking a look at a common occurrence along the US-Mexico border. Someone without a visa to enter the US joins a group that will attempt to cross the border undetected. They pay someone called a coyote to guide them along this irregular journey. Now this coyote, are they a trafficker, a smuggler, or both? These two terms are often used interchangeably when describing situations like this, but the truth is that they have clearly different definitions which the United Nations has established in international treaties. This video will clarify the difference between trafficking in persons, also called human trafficking, and migrant smuggling. From an international law standpoint, these terms have widely recognized definitions that do a pretty decent job of identifying cases of trafficking and smuggling. The issue, however, is that reporters and even lawmakers routinely misuse and confuse these words, which is obviously problematic when the public is paying attention to their articles and speeches. Furthermore, while trafficking is always carried out with the intent to exploit, the same is not automatically true about smuggling, so calling a smuggler a trafficker may wrongly label them as harmful to migrants. Now let's first talk about human trafficking. This definition can be found in the UN's Protocol to Prevent, Suppress, and Punish Trafficking in Persons. Be warned, it's a long one. To make sense of this chunk of the text, let's dive into three sections: act, means, and purpose. Think of act as what starts a trafficking situation. A trafficker must recruit, transport, transfer, harbor, or receive a trafficking victim. Notice how migration across a border is not necessary for human trafficking. Simply keeping a victim captive in their hometown is enough to qualify under the definition. Now let's look at the middle of this paragraph, which describes the means. You can think of this as a way that traffickers exercise power over their victims. This can be done through force or kidnapping, but more soft means are also used. These include deception and coercion, such as tricking victims into a trafficking situation by convincing them to consent, or being trafficked by blackmailing them, for example. The third component is the purpose. This is the reason why traffickers recruit and harbor their victims. The blanket term here is exploitation, although it can take many forms. Among commonly detected forms of exploitation are forced prostitution and related sexual violations, forced labor or slavery, often in domestic settings like households, and even the removal of organs. The UN's Office of Drugs and Crime has created this visualization of the human trafficking definition. The most straightforward way to use this in determining whether a specific case counts as human trafficking is to see if at least one element of each column is present. That means for a situation to be classified as trafficking, there must be an act, means, and purpose. Let's look at an example that the UNODC would recognize as trafficking. Now, Maria lives in Brazil and is offered a job as a live-in domestic worker, meaning she would complete household chores for one family in exchange for a salary, room, and board. This household is also in Brazil, meaning she would not cross an international border before starting to work. So Maria takes a bus on her own to her new employer's house, but upon arrival, her money and ID are confiscated and she is forced to work without receiving a salary. Here, the traffickers received and harbored her even though they did not play a role in her transit. They deceived her by lying about her working conditions. And finally, they exploited her. UN's definition of migrant smuggling. This can be found in the Protocol Against the Smuggling of Migrants by Land, Sea, and Air. Don't worry, it's more concise. Migrant irregularly enter a country. The definition does have two hint of the country they are irregularly entering. Otherwise, it would simply be a case of with the intent of obtaining a cash payment or some equivalent benefit. The most glaring difference between trafficking and smuggling from a migration standpoint is that smuggling requires a border crossing, whereas this is not necessarily a component of trafficking. A bit more. Now let's first focus on the payment smugglers receive. In many cases, migrants pay smugglers a fee before the journey starts, even though there is often no guarantee that they will arrive in their destination. Cash when they can't afford the journey. This is sometimes taken by force and used to pay for tools like fake travel documentation or paying bribes to officials or border guards depending on the chosen route. To be clear, migrants consent to smuggling and are thus not considered victims in the same way as trafficked persons. This does not mean, however, that smuggled migrants are always safe. Smugglers may put migrants in dangerous situations. We do know of reported instances where smugglers abandon migrants during the journey. Now, there can be blurry lines between trafficking and smuggling, but in general, these are the fundamental differences between trafficking and smuggling. That human traffickers compose a significant part of the smuggling industry. The European University Institute's Migration Policy Center looked into this claim and found that it's actually not well founded. Traffickers and smugglers are reluctant to operate along typical migrant smuggling paths. These routes are detection. This limits the number and frequency of people who can move along the smuggling situation. How would you classify the coyotes who are operating along the border? Share your analysis and thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to give a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. By the way, there's still much more to be discussed about this topic, such as data about these cases, not to mention the different strategies traffickers and smugglers use. Let me know in the comments what you're most interested in hearing about in the future. And I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.